hopefully it's going to be a minor event.
Actually, and it's got the booster, but man, everywhere I turn around, a lot of people in this building were sick.
Yeah, that's what Katie was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stay healthy.
Working on it. Part of that is getting out of here at a decent hour. There's a big freeze coming in.
Oh, I know.
Be back to the river tonight before.
No, sir.
Mayor, it's Brad. I'm on.
All right, sir. We're good to go.
Good evening. Today is January 19th, 2022. Time is 6:30 p.m. This is a city council workshop. The meeting will be held in person in the training room at Rockport Service Center, 2751 State Highway 35, bypass, Rockport, Texas, social distancing guidelines, and using video conferencing applications. These actions are being taken to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 by avoiding meetings that bring people into a group setting. Video conferencing capabilities will be utilized to allow individuals to address the city council. Members of the public can participate in the meeting remotely via Zoom by going to the city website and scanning the QR code or clicking on the link. Public participation is valued. Citizens wishing to express their views on any topic or agenda item can electronically submit a citizen participation form in order to register to speak by going to the City of Rockport website. Or if attending the meeting in person, register before the meeting begins. Using the same form, citizens can also provide written comments by the city secretary by 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting. The mayor will read the comments and be summarized in the minutes of the meeting. I'd like to take roll call. Ward 1. Here. Ward 2.
Here.
Ward 3.
Here.
Ward 4.
Here.
Mayor here. I note the presence of a quorum and call the meeting to order. Item 2, citizens to be heard. At this time, comments limited to 3 minutes will be taken from the audience from persons who have signed the speaker's card located on the table in the back of the training room of the service center and delivered to the city secretary before the meeting begins. All written comments received by 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting on any subject matter that is not on the agenda will be read by the mayor and summarized in the minutes of the meeting. Persons wishing to address the council and who have registered using the citizen participation form will have up to 3 minutes to speak. In accordance with the Open Meetings Act, council may not discuss or take action on any item that has not been posted on the agenda. While civil public criticism is not prohibited, disorderly conduct or disturbance of the peace as prohibited by law shall be cause for the chair to terminate the offender's time to speak. And I have a couple of forms. The first form is from Patrick Kane. He's a non-speaker and would like his comments read into the minutes. I can't believe the city is proposing to take on new debt again. The successful petition against the certificates of obligation showed we want input via the ballot box. You issued 4.72 million tax notes in September 2020, yet a year later you want more. You're asking for an additional 5.85 million for City Hall. This is a 37.3% increase over the construction cost estimate. You're asking for an additional 3.5 million for downtown drainage, which is a 152% increase over the 2.3 million provided from tax notes. You're asking for 1.9 million in vehicles equipment, which is a 63.8% increase over the 1.16 million requested in the defeated CO. With significant increases like this, I have little confidence in your ability to plan for our future. The debt you take on today will limit what our future leaders can do. The vehicles and dispatch equipment for which you won 2.7 million were line items in the proposed 2020 certificates of obligation. You have had ample opportunity to either address the requirements in your baseline budget where it belongs or bring them to the voters in the general obligation bond. The agenda packet, as well as the last city council meeting, failed to address, one, what is the expected interest rate of the new general obligation refunding bonds compared to the 2020 tax note, and what will it cost to refinance the September 2020 tax note? Refinancing this debt may not make sense financially. Two, what would be the impact of the interest in sinking INS rate if you limit your borrowing to $5 million for City Hall, defer the other requests, and let the existing tax notes untouched? If you want to take on new debt, you really need to look at what it would cost as a standalone loan. What I've heard today has sounded like a used car sales pitch. We all know you can keep payments low by stretching out the payment term, which is what is being proposed. However, the last pitch is plainly meant to hide the total. And then I have a form from Kristie Rutledge, who wants to speak on agenda item 2, so this is to be heard, and then later on, Ms. Rutledge, are you there?
Thank you, Mayor Rios.
It's on.
It's on. Can I confirm that I get to speak on both agenda items at the workshop and citizens to be heard? Great, thank you. City Council, I really can't believe we're here either. In October, you all know that the budget was debated extensively this summer, and I was invited to a meeting by Katie Griffin and Kevin Carew, and I went and met with my city council rep, Katie and Kevin, and I asked for this information that's being presented tonight. And then I submitted a public information request asking for what were the unfunded items that were in the city's budget. I never received response on my request. I've been stonewalled since the end of October. And this information you already knew because it was in the budget. It was in the budget that there would be unfunded items. I don't see anywhere in this plan of finance that we're addressing real infrastructure items that we need regarding the wastewater treatment plant, regarding the natural gas system. These are things in our capital improvement plan, but you all are jumping ahead and wanting to dump more money into downtown. These are the questions that I had for Kevin Carew and for Brad Brundrett and for Katie Griffin. How much money are we going to be putting into downtown? How much money are we looking at total for all of these improvements that you plan, these unfunded items that were listed in the budget? It was a page in the last part of the budget, hundreds of pages, and it said unfunded items. You all need to get back to your plan as far as sticking to what was presented and what was approved by this council this summer. And we need to go back to transparency, because I've asked for this information so that citizens had an opportunity to take a look at the overall plan for the city growth. And I've been stonewalled, and my public information requests have been denied for going on 3 months now. So terminating Kevin Carew has not made the change that we need. You all have a lot of work to do to come to terms with being transparent with your citizens about the growth, the infrastructure items that need to be addressed, the debt that you plan to take on. You already have these plans. You've been discussing this for a long time. Give us all of the information and take care of our infrastructure first. Our critical infrastructure that we need, our wastewater treatment system, our drainage in the country club where they flooded so badly, and in the residential areas that flooded, and the natural gas system that TCEQ is requiring that you upgrade. Thank you.
Thank you, This is on agenda item 3, so. Moving on to the workshop agenda, item 3. Discussion regarding the plan of finance approved January 10th, 2020 to issue general obligation refunding bonds to refund a portion of the city's outstanding indebtedness and possibly issue tax notes and certificates of obligation for the acquisition and construction of certain public improvements. And I have Ms. Marlatt.
I'm Adelaide Marlatt. I live at 456 Augusta. I'm a resident of Rockport. I would like to say thank you to RBC for putting this particular paperwork into the agenda, because that helped a great deal to understand how all of this is fitting together. And I think the most pertinent question that has not really been answered in earlier discussions is, what kind of interest rate, if we were to finance a week from today, would we get on all of this? That's a real question, because right now, 2 of the things that we're refinancing are already at 3%. And that's a pretty good rate. because the debt that we have now, it says it's between 2% and 5.2%, 2.5%. And a good question, another good question would be, what out of this listing is at 5? That's what almost ought to be refinanced besides something else. What we will get for refinancing the notes is 5 years. And at the end of 5 years, at the end of 10 years, you would have paid down a great deal. If you get
Finance was approved, presented to council immediately during the meeting. And our interim city manager, I haven't met you yet, but I look forward to doing that, said that he only got it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So that was not available to citizens in the agenda packet for the meeting where city council passed it. So did y'all see it prior to passing it, this plan of finance? I have a lot of questions about it. We're talking about vehicles. You all know that I studied the budget extensively. I'm looking at Exhibit A, City of Rockport fiscal year 21-22, annual operating budget. This was the last item that was approved after all of the budget changes and debates and everything like this, dated August 31st, 2021. The fund balance for the vehicles on October 1st was $1.1 million. So that was supposedly available. So where is that money now? And the revenues during this fiscal year, 21 to 22, was another $1.8 million. But now, here we are, 2 months later, and the budget's so screwed up that you're asking for tax notes for $1.9 million to purchase vehicles, when this money is supposed to be in the fund balance and it's supposed to be coming through revenues in this fiscal year. I say you all have some questions that need to be answered to the public about what's going on with this money that was budgeted and what's going on with the budget that you approved, and why are we asking for debt on things that is supposed to be paid within the budget. As far as the overages on City Hall, citizens told you all that. We told you all that in August of 2020 when we went and petitioned that. We knew that this was coming. We could see the price of lumber was kind of going up, and we petitioned those certificates of obligation because we knew that this City Hall was going to be more expensive than we can afford. And here we are, and we've got $11.62 million in new debt right now today. We're asking for AV equipment. Why are we funding audiovisual equipment and security equipment right now? What is this professional cost? Why are we funding things that we don't need right now through bonds? We shouldn't be taking out the maximum amount of bonds possible without raising the tax rate, which is what I heard in the last meeting, this is backwards spending. This is our money, and you have a responsibility to spend it responsibly. Spend it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, may I speak? It was a workshop, correct? I didn't have to sign up
You had to sign up ahead of time?
for a workshop?
Yes, sir. It's in the agenda.
I'm sorry, since it's a workshop, may I ask some questions?
This is a city council workshop?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're going to start the workshop right now.
Will citizens have the chance
We'll,
to ask questions?
we're not going to spend all night debating. This is a workshop for council. Okay, and you're allowed to participate, but if you're going to ask questions, we don't know.
Not that kind of
We might answer them during the workshop for you.
Okay.
Okay.
So participate by listening.
Yeah, well, your question might be answered. Okay.
I'm gonna hope. Yes, sir.
If it's not, then ask me. Okay, thank you. We want to start this with, do we want to go over the plan first? Where do we want to start, council? You were asking for the workout.
Yeah. I would suggest go ahead and reading the agenda item, and then
Okay.
two council members asked a question that I have an answer for, that I'd like to share the information with you. I think it will have an impact, it could have an impact on what you decide tonight.
And just to go again on item 3, discussion regarding the plan of finance approved January 10, 2020 to issue general obligation refunding bonds to refund a portion of the city's outstanding indebtedness and possibly issue tax notes and certificates of obligation for the acquisition and construction of certain public improvements.
Okay? Thank you, Mayor. Council members asked about previous bond issuances, and were there any outstanding proceeds, bond proceeds, that could be used? Well, number one, how much is there? And then number two, for what purposes could we use them? So I do have an answer for you. Staff, I got with Katie. Katie did some digging, and we have some information. The information is good. You do have some money, and I'm going to pass this out to you, and I'm going to ask Katie to see if she can email this to Councilmember Brundrett.
Already done.
There's a little backup to it.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So if you don't mind, I'll walk you through this real quickly. And then at that point, it is a workshop. You guys feel free to ask questions. Your bond counsel and your financial advisor are here, Tom and Bob. They'd be happy to answer any questions that you'd like. I think there were some questions about interest rates and those types of things. I'm sure those could be answered. And how the bond is structured. Great questions, guys. I think they could answer that question as well. But let's talk about this real quick.
Has Bob and Tom seen this?
I gave it to Bob just right before the meeting,
Thank you.
because it may impact what he says. Okay? If you look at this from the 2005 CO issuance, unspent proceeds, and it's summarized on the bottom, but I'll go through them item by item. There's about 2.5 million. Yes, ma'am.
2005?
2005.
Mine starts on 2012.
If you'll scroll, just move over to the official stated purpose, that last column.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay.
Got it.
The 2005 was refunded in 2012, but the proceeds are still available basically originally from the 2005. Okay? How's that for confusing? So right there you have 2.5 million that could be used for streets and drainage and utility system. From the 2014 combination tax and revenue bonds, you have about 423,000. Well, you have 423,374. which could be used for water, sewer, and gas systems. From the 2007, you have you have $1,087,324 that could be spent on streets, drainage, storm sewer, community, rec center, parks, service building, beach parking. Okay. Then from the 2015 COs, you have $228,489. From the 2007, again, oh no, that's zero. Then finally, from the 2016 COs, combination tax and revenue bonds, $176,975. That could be used to purchase land and could be used for basically parks. So on the bottom, it is summarized for you. And if I took a just quick look, you have about 3.5 million that you could spend on streets, drainage, and or parks. You need to be careful how that's spent because parks are in there too. 423,000 on the utility system, another 77 for the utility, and then finally that 405,000 basically for parks. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Again, I think this is good news for you.
Thank you very much for putting this together. Enlightening, to say the least.
There's quite a bit of detail, so we're happy to answer any questions if you have them. It's our pleasure to put that together for you.
I would note that none of this could be spent on the City Hall project. Streets and drainage, a large amount could be spent on that. Of course, what is designated for parks, I think we have to spend on parks.
So this money is sitting in investment somewhere?
Yes, sir, it's in, we have some of it in CDs and some of it is in our investment tools. But it is, we have been able to verify that it is able to be spent within, as soon as y'all tell us what to do with it.
So it was way more than what you thought it was?
Yes,
Yes.
sir. I was very surprised to find the old 2005 bond money. It was one of those go trails that we started on and it kept going in the same direction and it was a very pleasant surprise.
A question for Mr. Donahoe. Hey, Mike, the critical repairs that you did on the wastewater treatment plant, how much is that estimated to be?
About $3.5 million.
3.5, thank you.
Is this is a surprise, a good surprise. So is this counted towards our reserve? Is it our general fund reserve?
No, sir. This is actually identified separately within our budgets, within our audit. It's identified completely separately. We were able to tie these figures back to the audit this morning.
A couple of years ago, I honestly can't remember. I don't know if it was Harvey money or not, but there was some money left over from something that we did by the park, if I'm not mistaken. Am I wrong? By Memorial Park. No?
I remember we had a conversation that we had some money left over from the 2007 bond that could be used for parks.
Correct.
And we talked about doing, I believe, maybe some parking lot expansion and another entrance. And that is what you'll see within the 2.7, I'm sorry, the 1.087 under the 2014 GO refunding. That's where you'll see that we have available. And then we also, the other piece of that we have for parks that we talked about is we have 176,000 that was part of the money that we borrowed to purchase the, Benhams. And then we have 228,000 that's left over from 2015 CO that can be used for anywhere within the park system, and it specifically states aquatics as well. Some of the items, not to deviate too far, that we talked about during the budget workshop that we did not have a funding mechanism for, that was at Memorial Park. This could be an option that we could do, or for at the swimming pool. So to kind of keep that in mind, because it can only be used within our park system. And the details within the bond covenants was more detailed in saying that it had to do with repairs, extension, additions, and improvement to, as well as acquire and install equipment and related features.
I remember us talking about that. And it was discussed.
So we talked about doing some extension into Pearl Street from Memorial Park. We also have talked about canopy covers and pool blankets. I think we did figure out how to fund the pool blankets, but there are some other repairs that we talked about. We're going to defer another additional year. This is an opportunity that we may be able to go ahead and get those going if you so choose to.
I would suggest if that's something council wishes to do, staff put a list of projects together for you to consider for these funds.
Please.
Yeah, we will work on that next.
Richard, are we gonna be able to see that at our next regular meeting, or is that hopefully, or?
I don't want to overpromise because I don't know how much work it will take staff to put that together, but hopefully we could. So that will be the goal.
All right, thank you.
Okay?
Yep.
We can definitely have a list. It's gonna be a challenge to make sure that our cost estimates are accurate, knowing how quickly prices are changing, but we can give you what we have available.
We can at least bring possibly projects forward. I know staff has identified projects. I saw them in the budget as I reviewed it. You had projects out multiple years, not quite a 5-year CIP. You identified projects out multiple years, and take a look at those and bring those forward to you.
So about almost 3.6 of this approximately 4.5 million go back to 2005.
So is this something that's not like passed on? I mean, like from like where you came on, it was never passed on to you about this?
That would be correct. And the trick is that we had tracked the refunding version, but the original version was somewhat dormant within our general ledger. So today, when I was trying to figure out what was where, I started with the refunding and followed it back from 2012 all the way back to 2005 to find where the switch took place. And so probably somewhere in the prior finance director, the switch Some of this goes back, I believe, to John Washburn. The information wasn't transitioned effectively between the finance directors, and there wasn't a good process of tracking like I do for you all now. And so my thought is that we missed it because we weren't, to me, there wasn't a 2005 bond. There was just a 2012. And so that's where I didn't do as well as I should have done and known to continue to dig in, go back in time. But today, yesterday and today, we were trying to make sure that we had identified every single dime that can be spent in any single way for y'all to have tonight. And this is the result of 2 days of us literally digging and combing through old files and old worksheets that were dated back in 2009, 2007, that we were hunting and pecking through, trying to interpret.
And this has been verified, 100%.
It's been double verified.
I would just hate to say, y'all bring this to us and then it's not really.
That's my biggest scare. It was later in the afternoon before I actually took it to Mr. Morton because I wanted to make sure that I was comfortable with it. And then I handed it off to Lorenzo and I said, I need you to find this and make sure that I didn't make these numbers up. And then we verified again with Public Works on their tracking of projects that they thought that they had used for various projects to make sure. And we were within about $100,000 of their total when it came to that 05 bond. So I felt fairly confident that our audits had been right since 2008 and that our GL was correct. Because that we weren't able to know this information during our budget workshops because it definitely would have made our life a little bit easier. But now that we have it, we will, and we've changed a lot of things over the last couple of years, and this is one of those that is now a different process for us.
Mayor, Council, I know this will probably change your discussion, but we still need to have the discussion on what's in front of you tonight. Specifically, the refunding, the tax notes, and the possible CO of $3.5 million. And like I said, we have our bond counsel and our financial advisor here. They're great resources. And again, I heard specific questions about interest rates and how the bonds are restructured in the refinancing. Would you like to hear from Bob on that? Come on up, Bob.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. For the record, my name is Robert Henderson, Director of RBC Capital Markets. And for over 30 some odd years, I've had the honor of being a financial advisor along with members of my team to the city of Rockport. Not too close?
No, you're good.
You're good. There have been a number of questions that have been raised. I think the one, which is this lady, it was a pleasure to work with on city council. She always asks, some of the best questions. And I think the question was, what could we get on the refunding if we did it next week? We can't do it as quickly as next week, but we could get it done in probably about 3 weeks. But the answer to the question is that based on the city's current underlying credit rating, which we have no reason to believe that it would change, we could probably expect to refinance this debt at about between 3 and 3.25%, probably less. One of the things that's important to keep in mind is that the interest rates, the average weighted interest rate, is going to be a function of how many years out do we go when we refinance the debt. I teach this stuff at Texas State University as an adjunct professor, and one of the things I have to always remind people is that interest rates and risk are a function of time. To get the shortest possible or lowest possible interest rate, you borrow for the shortest period of time. Borrow today and you pay it back tomorrow. It's like the Fed funds rate, which is 0 right now. So when we're talking about refinancing these 2020 notes, and we talked about that at length when we did the transaction originally, the question becomes, how far do we stretch this debt out? As you know, because of the emergency provisions, the 7-year limitations extended to 10 years, and Mr. Clerk can expound on that in greater detail than I can. The useful life of the city hall that we're talking about constructing is projected to be 70 years. No one wants to borrow money for 70 years. As a practical matter, when this obligation was actively discussed back in 2020, we were talking about a 20-year average life, not average life, but final maturity on that transaction. If we were to go out 20 years, the answer would be slightly higher, maybe 3.4%. We're in a pretty flat yield curve. But the problem that we're having right now is the volatility in the interest rates. For example, we ran 2012 refunding last Friday, the 10-year treasury was at a 1.69% interest rate. Tuesday, we were closing money because of MLK. Tuesday, that same interest rate barrier was 1.87, so it literally went up 18 basis points over the weekend. Now today, the interest rates have dropped back down to within 5 basis points of where they were last Friday. So it's very volatile. But the short answer is, it depends on how long we go out and what the market is at the time, but I'm thinking 3.5% would be a conservative number. One of the things that's very interesting, and I congratulate Katie for finding $3.5 million. You know, I'm a taxpayer in this community as well and have been since 1984. So I've always maintained the less we could do in terms of debt, the better. So not having to issue that $3.5 million is a great thing, presuming there are no other slated uses. I want to ask the council, I know that a couple of council members are at a disadvantage because they weren't here when the council did its long-term capital improvement workshop back in February of 2020. And one of the things we talked about that time is just the basic concept of developing a long-term capital improvement program and the concept of maintaining a constant level INS tax rate. I gave the example of Dallas ISD, where I happen to be the financial advisor, have been for 7 years. We adopted a constant INS tax rate strategy at Dallas ISD, and in the 7 years I've been there, we have voted over $5 billion with a B in debt, and have issued about $2.5 billion of that debt with zero tax rate increase. And we will be able to issue all of the voted authorization with zero tax rate increase. The city of Victoria has adopted the same sort of constant INS tax rate. And the idea, and as we discussed then, and Virgin could probably shed more light on this, the idea is how do you balance long-term capital improvements of the city between pay-as-you-go, which to the extent that we can do that is always valuable. Floresville Electric Light and Power System, for example, where I'm also the financial advisor, their goal is to fund 50-50. Now, it took them a long number of years to get to that point, but they're now generating through increased utility system rates, they're generating enough cash that on an annual basis, as they look at capital infrastructure expenditures, they can pay for cash with cash for half of it, and they pay the balance of it with debt, which of course is then reduced through debt service payments. This whole concept of a constant INS tax rate strategy has taken on more impetus because of House Bill 2, which I think most of the elected officials understand what that is, which is a limitation set up in the state government with respect to how much you can raise in terms of ad valorem property taxation on an annual basis without hitting limits that would call rollbacks and so forth. And the advantage to not letting your INS tax rate fall is that you don't have these additional hurdles that you have to go through in order to raise the tax rate back up again at a later date. So an example of that, and I promise Mayor I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can, but an example of that is another client of mine, which is Kerr County, which is the city of Kerrville. They have got 70% of their tax base over there, not quite, but pretty close, 67-something% of their tax base is over 65 frozen. Now, what that means, and Richard's shaking his head because he already knows what that means. What that means is that when your tax rate falls, the over 65 frozen, because it is such a big retirement community there, and it's not as significant here in Rockport, but it is becoming more and more an issue every year. When that tax rate falls, it's locked in at the new lower rate. And even if you could exceed the thresholds that House Bill 2 set out in terms of raising rates. There are a certain percentage, in the case of Kerr County, 70% of their tax base, they can never raise the tax rate again, even 1/10 of 1 penny, they can't do it. So what you need to do, and what a lot of these communities have incorporated in their thinking is, how can we maintain the infrastructure of our community within the tax rate that we're at? We don't want to ask the taxpayers to pay more taxes, but let's not allow a decline in the tax rate that you lose forever because of over 65 freezes and now House Bill 2. Now, to bring all that full circle, and get back to her question, what's the interest rate going to be? It's going to be approved tonight. What's the length of the refinance that we do on the 2020 debt? Well, if we're going to maintain the 18.42% tax rate, which is certainly, in my opinion, advisable, and I'll leave it to your city manager and your director of finance to offer their opinion. The fact that you've got $3.5 million in CO or debt proceeds that you can now use and avoid the CO issues is a great thing. But we still want to maintain the INS tax rate of 18.42%, which means that we do the refinancing on a shorter basis. Keep our debt service higher than it would otherwise be, and pay the debt off faster. The citizens, of course, of Rockport are going to benefit by that because with a shorter final maturity, the total amount of interest paid over the life of the loan gets reduced. And it's not any different than all of us experience when you go to finance your homes or your cars. You get asked, do you want a 15-year mortgage? Do you want a 20-year mortgage? Do you want a 30-year mortgage? When you buy your car, do you want a 5-year loan or you want a 7-year loan? What the city here is doing, while it's complicated by state statutes, is basically conceptually the same thing. So we want to try to keep those payments shorter in maturity so that we can save the taxpayers of our community more money. But there's one more wrinkle. There's always wrinkles when you deal with governmental entities. And the wrinkle is, as at least one of your speakers spoke to, there are other capital improvement projects that the city of Rockport is going to have to undertake. Sewer plant project, gas system improvements. You're always going to need rolling stock. I have encouraged all of my clients for years to put together what we call a funded depreciation account, where you take the average useful life of your remaining rolling stock, and in your annual operating budget, you set money aside in that funded depreciation account so that we don't have to finance $1.8 million worth of equipment over a 5-year period of time. You'd like to be able to evolve where you don't have to do that. Obviously, the reason the number went up from 2 years ago was you've had more rolling stock, so useful life, roll off your project. And of course, there were things that, the 1.1 or 3, whatever the number was, didn't get funded 2 years ago. So, as I encouraged the city council in February of 2020, when we're looking at what kind of final maturity to put in this debt, one of the equations, one of the considerations has to be, where do you see the infrastructure of the city being 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 8 years down the road, 10 years down the road? Because we don't want to finance anything. We don't want to, keep looking at her because she was so good when she was speaking. We don't want to refinance this 2020 tax note so short that when you need a new sewer plant project in 3 years or 5 years, whatever the number is, and now we're having to look at raising that 18.42% tax rate. You don't want to have to go there. We're trying to provide, which the city council and administration in the city has done so well for many, many years, is stability, is predictability in terms of what the tax rate's going to be. Now, we all know because of school finance, and I'm happy to explain that to anybody that doesn't know that, but we all know that the primary driver in increased tax bills is not increased tax rates. It's in increased valuations on your property. That's what does it. The city has not irrationally raised taxes, nor has the city, nor has the school. In fact, the school, various legislation, has actually compressed their tax rate. So I'm sure like y'all, my tax rate went down. Not my tax rate, but my tax bill went down because the tax rate of the school district, which is the single largest taxpayer, a taxing entity in every county in the state, got compressed. But what happens is that notwithstanding is that your valuations go up. And the reason the valuations go up is because Texas Education Agency and the way that the Texas Education agencies monitor central appraisal districts, because funding for local schools is driven by how close are appraised values to actual market values, and if the appraisal district lets those two numbers get too far apart, it starts costing the schools in terms of available funds for them through tier one. I know I digress. The point is, great news. We've got $3.5 million worth of unspent proceeds. Great news that you have the ability to not have to issue certificates of obligation for that project. You can, by virtue of how we structure this refinancing, you can lower the INS tax rates because of that. Wouldn't recommend it because of the House Bill 2, because of the preservation of capacity for the city in the future, but it's something that you do. What I would anticipate doing with your city manager, Katie, is to try to dust off that CIP program that was adopted by the city council at the time in 2020 and say, okay, when are we going to need this gas plant infrastructure? When are we going to need the sewer plant infrastructure? Let's structure this refinancing in a way that allows us to maintain that 18.42% tax rate for 3 years, 5 years, and then we allow it to drop then and create the capacity for us to come in, finance whatever the capital infrastructure needs of the city are at that time, still keep that 18.42% INS tax rate. As always, I apologize, Mayor, long-winded explanation. I know that when people ask questions, it's probably easier for them to digest my answer, so I want to try to stop talking.
Wow.
I'm gonna try to stop talking and invite the council members to ask any question that you have.
May I say one thing, and then just real quickly, I don't think you should take off the table just yet. I think you should talk about it. This money is there if you want to spend it on eligible projects, and we should. We need to spend this money, and we need to bring you projects. If you still want to consider the 3.5 in COs that's on this agenda, that is one of the options you should talk about. Because again, you can, that debt not impact the tax rate. So that's all I'll say. I just want you to have your options.
Start from that end and we'll go down.
Oh, thanks. All right, Bob, you ready to talk again?
I'll answer any question you have to the best of my ability.
Outstanding. I have this very, I went through and went through the plan of finance with fine-tooth comb. And in the General Obligation Refunding Bonds, I would like to know why we're refunding a refund of a 2005 bond, which takes it from a payout to 2025 to, instead it's going to be paid out, finished payoff, 2037. That's how I'm reading this. Am I wrong? Am I right? Am I?
If you're reading it that way, then I did not write it clearly enough. There are two pieces of the refunding.
Right.
One is the refunding of the 2020 notes, and we would take that out to a final maturity of 15 years. The 2012 debt would be refinanced based on its original structure, and meaning that the final maturity would not be extended on that piece of it.
Okay, so it'd be refinanced out for what, another 3 years?
It would be refinanced, I don't have that in front of me, it would be refinanced to the same, I might grab my computer. It is a workshop, right?
You know me, I ask tough questions.
That's quite all right, I love tough questions. It would be refinanced to the final maturity that was originally sold at in 2012. And by the way, the 2012 GO refunding was also set up with the same final maturity as original 2005.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, I couldn't.
it was not extended at the time.
That wasn't easy information for me to find, so I figured on a workshop, ask the question.
Sure, absolutely. It is unusual to extend a maturity in a refinancing, as I'm sure Tom would back me up on. We're doing that with respect to the 2020 notes, because of the useful life, in fact, we were limited to 10 years at the time. And of course, the city council and the public were amply notified that that's exactly what was going to happen. Okay, I'll boot it up again, and I'll close that.
Pardon me, I didn't hear it. Did he say people were notified this was gonna happen? Yes? Okay.
Apologize for the delay. Okay, the final maturity of the General Obligation Bond 2012 transaction is 2026, February 15 and 2026. And the portion of the refunding would remain, that's attributable to the 2012, would remain in 2026. We're not extending the 2012 out yet. Now, let me also say in the same breath, because the 10-year treasury went up from last Friday to where it is today, as we explained to Katie, the savings associated with that 2012 refunding were marginal, about $62,500. Today, we couldn't get $62,500 in terms of savings because interest rates have gone up just since we wrote that report.
So I guess the follow-up question for that would be, why refinance something that we're gonna pay off in 3-4 years anyway?
Interest rate savings.
But, yeah, $62,000, is that just for this year, or is that over the next 4 years?
It's over the next 4 years, as I recall, it averages out about $16,000 a year. The answer is, it's free money, why not take it? I mean, the $62,000 is what we call net present value savings. It's after all the costs of the transaction are considered, and it's discounted back to 2021 or now 2022 dollars. So we would only do it for interest rate savings if we get to the point in 3 weeks where we're actually pulling the trigger, so to speak, actually affecting the refunding. If the savings aren't there, we won't do it.
Okay.
And I will tell you that, much to the chagrin of an underwriter, a big Wall Street bank, last Thursday we had a $317 million refunding going for the city for Dallas ISD. Today that's a $53 million deal. And the reason it fell from $317 million to 53 is interest rates went up to the point it wasn't cost effective to do that. And it's going to be on a smaller scale. It's going to be exactly the same thing here at Rockport. If it's economically advantageous to the taxpayers of the community, we'll refinance it. If it's not, we leave it off the table.
So okay, I got that.
Okay.
Cool. Now, I know we have to refinance tax notes. That's an obvious given, everything, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
So are we gonna see, and this is just a general question, because I don't wanna say it doesn't matter, but it does matter. Are we gonna see any savings in that?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and that's fine, that's fine. I just a question to ask.
Right. We're still saving based as compared to the 20 years that we were originally talking about doing the COs. But no, because we're stretching this out from 10 years to 15 years at pretty close to the same interest rates, we are going to have higher interest costs to the taxpayers of Rockport because we're stretching the debt. Debt's going to be outstanding longer.
So that changes the tax notes out to 2035 for payoff?
Final 2037, I think.
2037?
Yeah,
So
15 years from 2022.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
That's my first set of questions. I'll let everybody else talk.
Brad, is Brad in?
Mr. Brundred in there somewhere?
Does he have any questions? I'll just go, that's fine. Just kind of going to refinancing. And can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just bringing back to I'm being really stickler on the money here. The 1.9 million for vehicles. I know that, I guess I'm just reading it wrong, that we have funding for some of that, not all of it. Is there a way we can not do all the vehicles, do some here, some there? I'm trying to bring it down if we have to eventually refinance. I don't want to spend money that we don't have to.
Okay, I think I understand the question. I may not have the answer, and I'm looking at Katie, because I was not here during your budget process when y'all pretty thoroughly went through that list of vehicles, and y'all identified what you could buy to replace those vehicles. budget, you did identify that purchase would be probably in January, there's a note there, probably in January with a tax note. Is that not correct, Katie? Okay. The 1.1 to 1.9, I'm not sure why that grew, other than, again, we were looking for, staff was trying to do a good thing to try to get you a possible debt issuance to accomplish many good things for this community and not raise that tax rate on the citizens, okay? So that's where the 3.5 comes in, and that may be where the escalation comes in on the 1.1 to 1.6 to 1.9. That I'm not sure of. I'm guessing at this point, but I'm looking at Katie also for help.
So I can kind of clear up some of that. We did originally speak with y'all with just over 1.1 million is what we thought during the budget process that we would need for vehicles and equipment. We had a pretty accurate list of vehicles at that point in time. Between then and back in the fall, we had a $300,000 piece of equipment, our Vector truck, go down. I don't know what you know about the Vector truck, but it helps keep the sewer working properly so it doesn't back up and we have it in people's yards. We had a backup unit that was extremely ancient, and our fleet manager had patched it multiple times. Unfortunately, it has reached its life as far as the truck goes, but the tank was salvageable. Well, in our existing unit, the truck was good, but the tank wasn't salvageable. So he took 2 trucks to make one. I think I'm getting this right. And essentially, we have a pieced together Vector truck with no backup plan if that one goes down, and we do know that it is on its last leg. So 300,000 of that variance is the replacement of that unit. We've also had a couple other units within our fleet that were scheduled in the future 2 or 3 years, 23 and 24, that didn't quite make it. And we've had to, those need to be replaced as well. The average age of our equipment on the road is almost 20 years. The average age of our police units, we have some as old as 2010, and those are 7 years old. And those trucks that are out on our utility field, those are 10.5 years old. Another one of our high-dollar vehicles that went down earlier than it was supposed to was our crane truck that we use for our lift stations. I don't know, it's kind of a box truck that has a crane on top of it. Well, when it gave, it snapped the whole frame of that truck, which basically put the truck out of service and irreplaceable. You don't want to be messing with those frames, especially when you have that much weight on them with a crane. The replacement of that truck, if I remember right, was about $150,000. So there's your variance between the 1.1 and change and the 1.8. The rest is basically the cost of purchasing a vehicle. Our control units unmarked went up about $6,000, and our marked went up almost $10,000 from when we put our budgets together.
Thank you, Katie. That's a much more knowledgeable answer than I had, so thank you.
Yes, thank you, Katie.
And I,
Like,
The fleet manager's present, if y'all want to ask any questions. One of the things that, he gave me a little cheat sheet before he walked in. One of the items that I want to let you know is, because of the age of our fleet, we're spending a little over $500,000 a year to make repairs, rather than what we should be spending close to about $75,000 for just maintenance. So that's one of the reasons that we are hoping to do this and bring this forward. The reason that we do not have a large replacement fund at this point is because following Hurricane Harvey, we were not able to make the payments to our vehicle equipment replacement fund. So we got behind essentially 2 years on that, and that's kind of where we are right now. Currently, we're bringing in about $700,000 that we're able to transfer into the equipment replacement fund. So after we do this essentially catch-up mechanism that we were asking to do with the tax note, we will not have to do that again, because we will have the replacement program based on useful life of the vehicles and depreciation deposited back into there, so that we can then cash fund our purchases of vehicles going forward based on the multi-year replacement program that we've been able to establish this year.
Thank you. And then my other question was, so if you borrow the 4.4 million for City Hall and say they come back and they found a lot of savings, and they had came to us and already found $1 million that they could take out and save, are we still gonna keep moving forward on trying to save as much as we can? And then what if we don't spend that full amount? Can we use that on other things, or what happens to it?
So I think the answer to that is yes. The plan will be to value engineer that cost of City Hall down, but we wanted the full amount in there because we are unsure of the price escalations because of inflation. But if we bring it in, say we save $1 million in value engineering, the way we structure this tax note is not to be so specific as it's City Hall, streets, drainage, or whatever else you want to put in there that we could spend any of that savings on.
It's kind of like what these say, you know?
Right. So if, say we save $1 million through value engineering, you don't want to be so locked in with that language that you can only spend it on City Hall. You want to be able to spend it on streets or drainage or whatever you want.
And I just want to make sure that if we even go further or go forward, that we are able to do that.
Yes, and that is protection through the language that you build into.
Yes, I practiced law last time the lawyer was here.
While he's coming up, what's the average length of warranty for these new vehicles? So we get these new vehicles, there's a warranty on them. 5 years, so that'll be a cost savings as well.
The only thing that you have is tires, batteries, brakes.
Thank you.
For the record, I'm Tom Spurgeon with McCall Partners Horton, been bond counsel for a good number of years. Glad to be back. And I look forward to talking with you just for this meeting a little more formally. I always find it difficult to follow Bob Henderson because he does such a phenomenal job of explaining things and making it very clear and actually very entertaining in the same way. I don't quite have that gift. But I think what you were asking is just sort of clarification in terms of the what you can use the tax notes for, and that's exactly right, Richard. It's written in a manner there are no dollar amounts earmarked necessarily for the or there will not be specific amounts earmarked for just the City Hall or projects. But it does allow you to make the decisions as things go on in terms of how much you're going to end up needing for the City Hall project, the additional funds for City Hall. And then anything that you may have left over could be used for streets and drainage and for vehicles and equipment and things like that. So it's flexible in that respect, just sort of like what was done back in prior years. We never try to get so specific that limits you when circumstances happen that for whatever reason a project that you intended to finance changed in some manner. So you have the ability to apply it to other things. Exactly. When I say other things, as long as we have identified them in the ordinance, in the tax note ordinance. Right.
And just follow-up question, but we are going to continue to have them keep looking at savings that we can do, and I mean, bring it in front of us and make sure that we're on top of it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
As they value engineer and develop possible cost savings, we really need to bring those forward to you guys, because you may not want to cut this or that out of the City Hall, but you may be okay with cutting it.
Okay.
So, yes, we need to bring those forward.
Excuse me.
And we stop
Yeah,
to answer your question.
We just got a letter from Teal, from their subcontractor on the generator that had basically $477,700 for the anticipated savings on the electrical portion of it. Now, that's really good, but one of the other problems we have is we have not gotten an approval from FEMA yet to move forward on the Teal bid. And that bid expires, tell me, Richard, February 7th?
February 7th.
February 7th. I had a call, excuse me, I have a call into Congressman Cloud to help us put pressure on on FEMA to try to move forward. But if that bid expires, we're gonna have to go through the whole process again. And my feeling, based on what everyone's saying, is it's not gonna be less, it's probably more. How much more, we don't know.
Hopefully, we'll be able to work with Teal. The 60-day deadline is to protect the contractor, the bidder. And if that 60 days expires, I believe that if they'll work with us, maybe we can push it. But we'll have to work with them and see. But they would have the right after 60 days to say, we're not doing this project anymore. Is that right, Mike?
Correct.
Okay.
They have the option to not hold that bid price after 60 days. And they also have the option to work with us. And we have made multiple contacts at the state and the federal level within the last week to try to get an answer. The question is, we only received 2 bids. Federal requirements for the grant monies that we're getting for this project require 3 bids. In the past, FEMA has granted other communities an exemption and allowed just to have the 2 bids. If they were competitive and meet all the requirements of the FEMA funding process, they would allow us to accept the 2 bids, and we had the ability to pick the low bidder. Teal has the ability to hold the price after 60 days, or they have the ability to reject anything after 60 days and rebid the project. So it could be to their advantage and to our advantage to work together to see if they would extend it, give us more time than just the 60 days after February the 7th, waiting on an answer from FEMA. And we're pushing FEMA as hard as we can. At the state level, we have the Texas Department of Emergency Management helping us push FEMA to give us an answer prior to February the 7th.
That's all for me right now. Thank you, guys.
Brad, did you have any questions?
Mayor, Brad here. One question. The soft goods and audiovisual, does it make sense to go ahead and do that through tax notes now, not knowing what those costs may be in an 18 to 24 month time frame from now?
Part of that, I think, comes to me in terms of what the interest rate environment's likely to look like. We're going to have to finance it in 18 to 24 months. Based on the anticipated federal funds moves this year, you certainly expect to pay higher interest rates. The other half of that question is going to be the same thing y'all were just discussing on the City Hall project, fuel contractor, which is simply what's that equipment going to cost in 2 years? I can't address that.
Yeah.
Question related?
We can get a firm price now.
I was gonna say that anticipated cost on the audio visual and security system for the facility, if I'm not mistaken, is around 1.8. I don't have the figures in front of me for the whole project.
It's about 1 million total.
I'd have to go back and look at the agreements. There's an agreement with a nonprofit that is gonna help us with that part of the project. And
Yep. Councilmember Brundrett, this is Richard. I know you can't see me, but I think that we can go ahead and purchase that equipment now, and it may have a 4 to 6 month delivery on it. So the dollars I've seen for just the audio visual security was like 800,000, if I remember right. But yes, that's a good question, but I think it would behoove us to go ahead and buy it now. I think it's been specified in spec, and there is a long delivery time on that type of stuff.
I understand our delivery times now with the COVID world. I would hate to buy something today and it not be used for 24 to 36 months 24 months down the road, and it's already the way technology moves, it may already be outdated.
Well, we would order it now, we wouldn't necessarily pay for it right now. I mean, we're not gonna fund anything until it's, it's ready to go. And you're right, technology does change, but if we wait, who knows if the new technology is gonna be more or less, or how much different it's going to be. Right now, right now we're running on ancient stuff. Yeah, it's a good question, but again, it's a, the organization is pretty much like a co-op. They do a tremendous amount of work in municipalities all over the country. We went to one of their workshops last spring, and we also visited the new city or new county courthouse in Hondo, where they were putting the equipment in, and it's pretty impressive. I think, Tommy, you were with us then.
Yes, sir. Mayor, I might add that there's maybe a intermediate position here, and that is go ahead and finance the equipment now. Wait until 6 months before you're actually ready to install, before you order it, see what technology changes this. So we can lock in the interest rates, lock in the debt service structure now. But to Mr. Brett's point, which I think has some validity, wait a year before you actually submit the order. As Mr. Spurgeon explained, under federal tax law, you have 36 months from the date that you close this transaction to actually spend that money. So just because we're financing it now doesn't mean we have to expend it now.
I don't think we're contemplating ordering the equipment and having it sit here.
Right.
No, that wasn't the process at all. We're going to commit.
We already have a portion of the equipment that was ordered and stored. It's already stored here. And it's electronics for the new facility. And we need to look at that and discuss it.
Does that answer your question, Brad?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anything else right now?
Just one thing, Mayor, for the next meeting, if possible, can we get the CIP for those of us that weren't on council back in February? Can we get that to us for the next meeting?
Yes, sir. I'll pull what was presented back then, and if we can update it by then, by the next meeting, we'll do that too.
Thank you.
Can the public have some follow-up questions?
Yes,
So I tried to listen real carefully to the last meeting when you were discussing this debt proposals of Planet Finance. And the idea was to max get these bonds, General Obligation Refunding Bonds. I was surprised we were refunding bonds with such little savings, $62,000. Glad to hear it's not drug out for a further period of time. My question is what are the fees to your bond counsel and to your financial advisor and any other fees that are related to this? Because we keep hearing that this is going to save us money, but really, we don't know about all those other costs. So that needs to be brought forward to the public, needs to be considered by the council before you all decide on your finance.
I believe and part of Mr. Henderson's comment, he said that is inclusive of all fees, commissions.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for clarifying that. And the other thing is that we definitely heard during the tax notes for City Hall that our tax rate would not be increased. And 1 year later, there were pretty intense debates this last summer about how the tax rate needed to go up 8%. And there were all sorts of different shenanigans going on with the city manager and the finance director and trying to raise the tax rate. So the tax rate will
Ms. Rutledge, thank you.
with
It's
additional.
not germane to
Thank
this
you.
conversation. Now, that's more of a statement, and we're happy to answer questions that are pertinent to this project here.
Is Jeff out there?
I was gonna ask if you had put those questions were answered. Anything else?
Oh, yes. I got a lot more questions.
Okay, that's what this is for.
Okay, my next question is, why a combination of tax notes and COs? Why are we using tax notes?
That's a legal question. I can answer it, but it's gonna be shorter if he does.
Mr. Spurgeon?
I do have a meeting tomorrow night at 7, so you have to stop talking now.
Very simply, they are both secured to the same debt, have lower taxes, so, and in terms of sale, interest rate provision, all those things, they're treated the same. Same security in terms of someone who wants to buy bonds. But the differences have to do with the manner in which they are issued and authorized, and maturity limitations. Certificates of obligation can literally go out 40 years, just like if you did a voted bond. You go up to 40 years. So, and that's used a lot for all sorts of different types of projects with longer life, et cetera. Tax notes are limited to 7 years normally. Now, Bob alluded to the fact that back in 2020, we did do those COs, or the tax notes rather, for 10 years, because there's a separate provision in the tax note statute that allows you to go up to 10 if it's for to address an emergency, which you did. All of the projects that you financed with the tax notes, all related to projects that were damaged or destroyed by Hurricane Harvey. In this case, we're looking at a 7-year tax note, and that will also be for the City Hall project. When the 2020 tax notes were issued, it was fully expected at the time that they would be refunded at longer. The statute does allow those to go out longer than the original final maturity, and that was the original plan for 2020, et cetera. I don't think that's the plan in this case, although I don't want to step out too far from the bottom, but I think the overall debt service schedule is set so that we're not anticipating refunding, but I don't know.
Well, that's correct. We're not currently anticipating the need to refinance any portion of this 8.1 million. And one of the things that Mr. Caruth and the mayor were very adamant about when we were structuring the 8.1 million is to make sure that those items that had a shorter useful life, the $1.9 million of equipment, which we know is going to be worth, it's going to be obsolete in 5 years, at least on paper, and the same thing for the audio visual. So that sort of stuff is absolutely being paid off very quickly. However, you asked the question, and it's a thank you. Can we get the long-term capital improvement program updated? And
I'd like to see it.
yeah, and would there be the opportunity to refinance that in the event that there are other capital improvement programs, projects that you want to undertake within the parameters of the same tax rate? So in that respect, we would anticipate putting a fairly short call on that tax note to maintain the flexibility of the city to refinance it should other capital improvement programs come up. But it's unlike the 2020s where we told the public up front it was going to be refinanced. We're not, from my perspective, we're not telling them that now. We would not currently anticipate that now.
You used a term I didn't quite understand. Short call?
Short call. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No problem.
A call date in a bond transaction or a debt transaction is simply the earliest date at which you can refinance the money, the transaction. And the reason that's important is that the Securities Exchange Commission rules require that you can guarantee yield to an end investor to a certain date. So when we issue this debt, in a typical, for example, in a typical even 15-year certificate of obligation, we would put a 9-year par call, meaning that we cannot refinance the debt any sooner than 9 years from the issuance date. But when we do refinance the debt, it's refinanceable at par or 100% of the stated value, so there's no premium that has to be paid. In the 2020 notes, we put a short call meaning less than the normal 9-year call, because we anticipated it to be refinanced at the time that debt was issued. So with respect to the $1 million tax note, we're looking at a final maturity of 7 years. We would probably, by definition, it's going to be shorter than the normal 9-year call. We'd probably look at where the underwriters would feel comfortable pricing-wise at a 4 or 5 year call date. And what we want to make sure then, Richard, and of course Katie, is that before we get to that 4 or 5 year period of time, we would not anticipate another need for financing for the sewer project or the sewer plant project or the gas project, or if we do, that we would finance those projects out of utility system revenues as opposed to tax revenues. So long-winded answer, I know, but the call, the call is the earliest date at which we can pay off the bonds early, either paying them off or refinancing them. And when I say short call, just make that shorter than we would normally make it.
Okay, don't matter. Next question to you. Now I lost it. I know that in the past, when, talking to Katie about bonds and stuff, we front load, we back load, we load it however we choose. Have we already looked at that, or is that something that we won't look at for a while until we get closer to issuance?
It's going to be closer to the issuance because you guys have got to make a decision as to what debt you're actually wanting to issue. It's going to be great to have the CIP so we know, okay, it's 3 years we need potential extra stuff, or it may be 7 years. So we need a little bit more information. Obviously, we made some educated assumptions in the plan of finance.
I know she might have some more. She looks like she has more.
I've had at least one more. The timetable that you presented in the plan of finance, just because, well, I'm like, I got it here, might as well look at it. What's the preliminary official statement?
An official statement is a securities offering document that we would put together like a prospectus when you buy stocks. It's a securities offering document that is distributed to investors for them to analyze the financial condition of the city, the economy of the community, potential tax rate impacts.
So that's something that you put out and then have people comment or whatever?
Well,
as a draft?
It is a document of the city.
Okay.
Mr. Spurgeon and myself will help draft the document, but it's going to be incumbent upon the city manager and the director of finance and whoever else is interested to comment on it, to review it, to comment on it in advance to make sure there's no material misstatements of fact or omissions of material fact. Because if there's a problem with the offering document, I want to make it very clear, thank you for asking the question, the city's ultimately going to be the ones on the hook. We'll get in trouble too, but we won't get in trouble by ourselves. The city will get in trouble too. So it's going to be very important that that document be absolutely accurate. Now, the other term is preliminary. There's going to be two official statements. One is the preliminary one that we send out to the investors in advance of the pricing transaction. Once the debt has actually been sold and the specific interest rate, terms, and conditions have been established, we will drop that into the official statement and put out what's called a final official statement, beyond which those terms and conditions would not change.
Thank you for explaining that.
Certainly.
Okay, now that's it for me for right now.
May I ask a question? This is for you. If council chooses to just go with the tax notes and forego a CO, though, there's two different time frames there, one for the CO, one for the tax notes. Can you explain the difference?
Well, the reason that I structured it in a hurry-up basis, and meaning that we could, because of the difference in the notice of publication requirements, we could issue both the notes and the refunding bonds faster than we could issue the certificates of obligation. Under normal conditions, and I think I said this in the plan of finance, under normal conditions where we were in a flat interest rate environment, no rush, because interest rates aren't going to change. But the COs together with the tax notes were going to be about, yes, COs and tax notes were going to be about $11.6 million. We didn't want to risk holding that $11.6 million in debt issuance until we did a $3.5 million deal, because we didn't want interest rates on the bigger piece, the $11.6 million go up. So that's why we had different time frames. Because, as we've talked about before, the Federal Reserve has been very open There are comments that they're anticipating 3 interest rate hikes, I think almost certainly. And of course, you know, if I knew for sure, I'd be talking to you from my yacht in the Caribbean. But we know for sure that they're anticipating a tax rate increase in March. There are some discussions as to whether or not that would happen sooner. So we're just trying to get ahead of any interest rate increases at the Fed.
You know Paul Volcker's not gonna come in and save us this time like he did with Reagan, so.
I don't think it's going to happen.
Adelaide, question?
So right now, quick movement is because of volatility. I mean, the stock market's up and down like you wouldn't believe. T-notes are up and down. So the quicker we move, the less volatile.
Exactly. And again, I hate to mention other people, but tomorrow we're selling $470 million worth of debt for Dallas ISD. That is just like your tax note deal in that it is a new money, fixed rate transaction. We're going to sell them tomorrow, trying to lock in the lowest possible interest rates that we can. Then there's the second transaction is a 317, or what last week was a $317 million refunding. We're going day to day and hoping as the volatility comes up and down, we can find a window to get enough interest rate savings to the district to make it worthwhile doing. So we're locking in rates while we can on new money. We're going with the market flow with respect to the refund.
Thank you.
You have a question?
Yes, may I ask one question? I must be missing something. On the big tax notes that we were talking about refinancing, they are currently 10-year notes, and they're at 3%. And everybody says we have to refinance them. And what we will be refinancing them to is a higher interest rate for 15 years. Why would we not consider paying it out in 10? We're the ones who call it. No one else is going to. And so we, at the end of 10 years or somewhere in between, a wise person would say, okay, I'll start a sinking fund because I know in 10 years I've got $5,000, $5 million that are due or something like that. It's less than that, it's 4, right?
Well, I understand the question. It's a good question. I'm going to back up with mine. I had dinner with somebody with COVID, so I don't want to get too close to it. No, it's a great question, but the answer to the question is that we're trying to create capacity within the existing 18.42 cent tax rate to do this additional debt without raising that tax rate. So you're making a good point, but if we don't refinance the 2020s, there won't be enough room within the 18.42 cent INS tax rate.
There won't be enough debt in the 18%, is what you're saying.
There won't be enough debt capacity. There won't be the ability to issue more debt within that same INS tax rate.
Okay, the INS tax rate then would go down?
No, ma'am. If we don't refinance, the 2020 debt, and you try to issue the tax notes, that tax rate is going to go up, not down. And we're trying to avoid it going up.
So we're making those, it's because you're attempting to issue another $8 million,
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Within the same tax rate.
Okay, but how will it all, just because you're lengthening it, it all fits?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Ms. Cook.
How can the city issue a statement of financial condition with any kind of surety when we just found $3.5 million yesterday afternoon, just laying around from 2005? So I think we need to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. So that's a serious question and something really important to answer. I believe we had this kind of same issue during the budget discussions where things were found missing or whatever, and I appreciate that. I really, really do. And you know I do. Are we sure of our financial condition, that this INS rate is what it is and all this debt is what it is and all of this? Thank you.
So I guess we pretty much come down to is, do we want to take out $8.1 million as a tax note or something less? And do we want to do the CO or not?
That's correct. This is a workshop.
It's not an action item.
So,
But I boil it down to what the question actually is.
exactly. What is council's desire moving forward? Right now, the clock is ticking on the CO because we've issued the notice of intent. If council chooses not to follow through with that, that can be ended.
Right.
The tax note calendar, that's why I was asking Bob about the two different calendars. If you choose to move forward with the tax notes versus COs, we'll bring an action item, I guess, to you, and you tell us what you want to do. But this workshop is exactly what it was intended to be. Answer your question.
Right. No action or
No,
any decisions being made.
No decisions tonight. Just answer your questions and work it through.
And I can see what Katie's saying is that, are the CO bonds even needed with the money that we found in the old bonds? Do we need to issue new COs? And then I guess this question would be for Bob. Would that affect, if we did not issue COs, would that affect our capacity moving forward?
That's a great question, and I've got an answer, but it's not going to be as short as Ms. Jackson would like it to be. The answer is, again, Mr. Brundrett, that is, if you decide to do it that way, we're going to alter the structure of the refunding in order to maintain the 18.42 cent tax rate, to maintain the stability that the city has demonstrated for so many years. In terms of future capacity, that gets to whether or not how short a call feature we put in it, and do we preserve the latitude to refinance debt to create capacity for any future capital improvement programs. So I think, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I think, the question is, are these projects that the city needs? Or is it equipment that the city needs? Is it audio-visual security stuff the city needs? I think you make that decision. Do you need it or do you not need it? And if you do need it, what's the most cost-effective way to finance it?
Understood. Thank you, sir.
I think Tom had some clarification.
And back to starting the process with the COs, I know you've not made a decision in terms of not going forward with the COs, but we kind of did start the clock in connection with issuing COs for perhaps an approval on March 8th, which means that there's a notice of intention, I think would have been published this week, the first time. And under the law, you have to publish it twice. So without the council being able to make a formal decision to say, we're not going to do that, we're going to recommend that you go ahead and publish it the second time. If you do decide not to do the CO, I would also recommend that you just take formal action so that it's on the record that you're not moving forward with the actual CO issuance. And that way there's no question then in the community about whether or not you're going to be issuing these COs.
Thank you.
What is this dispatch equipment?
You're talking about the 835,000?
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to let those two answer it over there.
Our 911 dispatch center is in the public safety center. As you know, it's in a vulnerable area within our community. And what we're proposing to do is take a portion of this building and we're going to put a dispatch console in one of the offices with all the cabling and all the radio equipment. Be able to flip a switch when needed and move dispatch out to this location. So if the public safety center was compromised, or we had a weather event or something, we would have a backup emergency dispatch center for our community.
So this is not something that's time sensitive, but it would be much better to do it sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. That's correct. We have no redundancy whatsoever that we can rely on immediately. For us to create that, we have to do it from the field, and it's a weakness that we need to correct sooner than later.
Thank you.
Anything else? I believe we're, I appreciate the information that you brought forward. The exchange. Thank you so much for getting here, coming. I hope the council's had all their questions. Okay.
If I think of anything else, I'll reach out to you, Katie. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Jack, you can call me anytime, give us an option,
Time is 8:06. We're adjourned.
You are a funny, funny man, I want you to know that.
So far. Of course.
Hey, ask any,